It's time for Herd Mentality, the weekly episode where you control the discussion today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino from the Draft Network, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Happy Tuesday to you, and thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day. And as a reminder to you, we are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Well, folks, as you may imagine, my emails and DMs overfloweth with questions coming out of the playoff loss to the Bengals. And so on today's episode of Herd Mentality, I did my best to go through and pick out the most common talking points that I saw populating those emails and those DMs. And so let's get into it. I know there's a lot of tough questions, a lot of thoughts on everyone's minds here in the aftermath of how the season ended. So let's dig into it. The first one comes from JD. JD says, could go a lot of different ways after an ugly loss like that, but after taking some time to think about it, my biggest concern is on the Bills drafting. They have sunk 2 firsts and 2 seconds into a D-line that doesn't look impactful, a 2 and 2 threes into running back, drafted a number of depth offensive linemen who aren't making a big difference, and repeatedly traded up. Being the draft dude that you are, what about their evaluation process do you think needs to change? Well, I look back at 2017 and 2018, and we all know that those were exceptional draft classes that in a lot of ways, those 2 classes, 17 and 18, got them to this point. And since then, I think it's fair to extend some criticism because it's been a lot of role players, but not enough impact. And I think that is as big of a contributing factor as anything into looking at the why in terms of why the team stalled out this year, last year, and the year before that. One of the things that I've said repeatedly on this podcast, and I think this is a great opportunity to bring this up again, is that as the Bills roster got more expensive, which it has, right? You look at what Josh Allen makes and Tre'Davious White and Dawson Knox and Mitch Morse and Deion Dawkins. The list goes on, right? As the roster became more expensive, I've always said that the Bills' ability to really sustain success is going to be tied to their ability to hit on draft picks. And I think you can look over the last 4 drafts and see some role players, but not enough big-time impact. You're over here drafting Boogie Basham and AJ Epinesa, and the Chiefs are drafting Creed Humphrey and Nick Bolton, right? That's a big difference, and I think that's a really good example of that. You're out here drafting Cody Ford, and the Bengals are drafting T. Higgins, right? You've not had those same types of hits, especially on day 2 over the last several drafts. And so what needs to change? Well, I think first of all is an acknowledgement that something needs to change, right? You need to consider how you're building this roster and the swings that you're taking in the draft and finding ways to get players that are more impactful. And that's significant. And the Bills are going to need to find some impactful draft classes here to really get back on track. And I don't think the book's written on Kyer Elam or James Cook or Khalil Shakir. I think those can be really impactful players from this past draft class. But I'm becoming less and less optimistic about guys like Boogie Basham and AJ Epinesa, to really wind up being high impact players. And you look at the opportunity cost, and I think you come away with some disappointment. John says, your thoughts on Leslie Frazier in the postgame podcast got me thinking. Do you think there comes a point where consistency creates predictability? Elite offenses know what they're going to get when they go against the Leslie Frazier defense, which emphasizes why a change would be for the best. I'm not sure it's predictability. That's not the word that I go to. I think that Leslie Frazier against top offenses, especially in the playoffs, haven't done a good enough job of actually taking something away and making teams play differently than what usually makes them successful, notwithstanding Lamar Jackson and the Ravens. Obviously, Leslie Frazier has a great plan for how to deal with that. But what did you take away against Burrow? What have you taken away against Mahomes? It seems like Kelsey is Kelsey and Hill is Hill and Burrow is Burrow, that Joe Mixon runs the ball extremely well. I mean, you have to take something away. You have to challenge the strategy of the opposition. And I think a lot of off coverage, especially in this Bengals game, was ridiculous. You're giving free access. You're giving them easy completions. Joe Burrow, who's got one of the fastest triggers in the NFL behind an offensive line with 3 backups, so you know the ball's coming out quick. You're playing off coverage. The Bills rely on their scheme to make offenses stack plays and sustain drives and not give up stuff down the field, but don't do a good enough job of just simply taking something away, making teams play the game differently than they want to. You see teams be able to take Diggs away and force the Bills to go other places, and the offense isn't as good. So instead of relying on, hey, we don't think you can stack together 10, 11, 12 plays consistently enough to score on us enough times to beat us, how about just making them play the game differently? I don't think the Bills have done a good enough job of that. We're just relying on, hey, we're going to be disciplined. We're going to do our 111th. We're going to trust the scheme. Okay, that's good. Those are all great, true, good talking points. But take something away from the other team. What does Bill Belichick always say? You want to make offenses play left-handed. What offenses are the Bills making play left-handed? When I watch Justin Jefferson against the Bills. Jonathan Taylor and the Colts rushing offense, phenomenal against the Bills, right? You have to take something away. Make it uncomfortable for teams to embrace a different script to be successful on offense, not just that they have to execute a bunch of plays in a row to score. Vin says, last year after the loss to Kansas City, I was absolutely heartbroken. However, I did come away honestly feeling like it would be a matter of time until Allen brought us a Super Bowl. After this loss, I feel angry, let down, feeling like this team has a long way to go to win a championship. How many resources, draft picks have been invested into this defensive line? Where were they? They had three backup offensive linemen in the lineup and got absolutely dominated. I'm not a defensive coordinator, but how come it felt like there were no changes being made to eliminate the quick passing game for Burrow? I know we aren't the only team to ever face that before. How many times this year did we watch average quarterbacks convert on third downs? I've always been a McDermott supporter, and I'm not calling for his job, but I sure would love to hear your thoughts. Is it too much to ask for us to put together a defensive game plan to eliminate the underneath stuff and force the backup offensive line to pass block an extra second or two? Absolutely, Vin. Absolutely. Why are you giving him that free access? You needed to muck up the first read and give your defensive line a little more time to get home. What are you afraid of? You're afraid of getting beat deep? Well, they hit some throws down the field, and they stacked 10-play drives against you when they wanted to. You didn't take anything away. You made it easier for Joe Burrow to execute the quick game, which we knew he was going to execute. Why wouldn't you rather live in a world where you live and die with low percentage throws? Higgins and Chase are good vertical receivers, but it's not like they have elite speed. They have good speed, but not elite speed. It ain't Hill and Waddle where they're just going to run by you. Try to make some catches tough down the field, but don't just give them dink and dunk free access throws at will against you. Yes, take something away, Vin. And I put this question right after that last one because I thought they tied together extremely well. Take something away. Bills haven't done a good enough job of doing that. The NFL playoffs are here, and we are really excited about our new sports betting partner for Locked On because they're the number one sports book in America, FanDuel. And if you're new to FanDuel, that's even better. They have so many great features that make betting on sports fun and easy. New customers, join today to get started with $150 in free bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Just sign up at FanDuel.com/locked on. FanDuel has all your favorite bets for the money line to point spreads to player props. Plus, you can even combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same game parlay. All on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. So football fans, don't miss out. Place your first $5 bet to get $150 in free bets, win or lose, at FanDuel.com/locked on. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL. The next one comes from Scarecrow, who says, DeAndre Hopkins is apparently available for trade this offseason. You have two choices. Use draft capital and cap space to make that trade, or use the same draft capital and cap space to invest in the O-line. Which would you prioritize? Very easy for me, the offensive line. Now, that doesn't mean I don't want the Bills to make an investment at wide receiver too, because I do. I want that. But when you invoke DeAndre Hopkins, I become less interested. Hopkins is 31 years old. He missed 8 games this year. He missed 7 games last year. I prioritize the trenches over the weapons, although, like I said, both of those upgrades are necessary. I just don't get super excited about Hopkins. I very much worry about an Allen Robinson trajectory there, like the end of the Bears with Robinson into just completely flaming out as a free agent signing for the Rams. I worry about D-Hop being on that same type of trajectory. Especially, he's got a no-trade clause. I think he's owed 2 years and $54 million left on his deal. I'm not real familiar with how that structure works. Oh, by the way, you have to give up something. Now, if you can get him cheap, I know they have a new general manager, new head coach in Arizona. The new GM's already been hired. The head coach is to come. I think you could get him at a discount, but it would have to come at, hey, I'm not giving up much. I mean, if Amari Cooper goes for a 5, I'm talking that type. That's what I'm talking about giving up for Hopkins. And that comes with some serious consideration for his contract. And I just don't know if I would get to the point where I'm comfortable on either side of that, whether it's the contract that you absorb or the compensation that it takes to get him. I want trenches. And I want a wide receiver too. But if in this context, would I prioritize the O-line or the weapons, I'd prioritize the O-line. Brian says, in regards to the conversation about changing defensive coordinators and the recurring theme of bad tackling, is tackling something that can be a coaching problem through training, scheme, or overall defensive system, or is it a player problem that you have to live with when it comes to the higher-end players? Brian, I think all of that comes into play. I don't think it's any one thing. I don't think it's, training, scheme, system, players. It's all of that. But I can tell you this, the biggest cause for missed tackles, and I actually watched film last week. I watched 2 defensive backs with a former NFL player that was in the league for 7 years that's currently an NFL scout. We watched film, and we were talking about tackling, and he said the biggest – there's some guys that just make business decisions, right? They take crap angles, and they don't want to be involved. All right, so you have that. But then – it really does come down to angles and being in a good position to get somebody on the ground. And I think the Bills' style of defense, a penetration style, up the field defense, can create some more challenging angles. And I think where you see a lot of missed tackles is from the defensive line, and I think that could be a result of it. But that doesn't excuse Milano. That doesn't excuse Poyer missed multiple tackles in that game against the Bengals. I know it's hard for him with his health. I get it. Dane Jackson's been missing tackles all year. Trey White, that dude don't love to get physical and tackle people. So, yeah, I hear you on the front with some of that penetration stuff, but your back 7 has to be better tacklers. And I think for the most part, late in the season, the Bills tackled fairly well. I think they had 7 missed tackles against the Bengals, which to me, based on watching this defense for a number of years, that's kind of a number I can live with. And I think they had like 7 in the previous 3 years, 3 games combined. But it's not uncommon for us to look at Bills games and look at missed tackles and see it 10, 11, 12, 16 missed tackles. But I think there's the answer to your question, I think, is all of the above. OTP says, one coach I do question and have questioned for at least a year is Coach Washington. Do you think his job should be safe? Seems like we invest so much in that position, and yet we consistently underperform there. So anybody who's not familiar, Eric Washington is the Bills' defensive line coach. I'll say this about Coach Washington. He's coached some really good defensive linemen, going back to Carolina, whether it was Kawan Short, Charles Johnson, Coney Ely. He had some good players there. I appreciate how Von Miller has spoken of Eric Washington. I think that says something. Maybe we just have to accept that A.J. Epinesa and Boogie Basham aren't good players, right? They're replacement level rotational linemen. They're DE4s. Maybe Ed Oliver is always just going to be more flashy than a consistent impact player because he's a complete outlier in terms of size when it comes to height, weight, and length. People seem pretty happy with Harrison Phillips and how he developed under Coach Washington. I like where Greg Rousseau is trending. But I think it's fair to, on one hand, say, you know what, man, there's been some really good defensive linemen and some good development under Eric Washington, but there's also been enough concerns there for you to ask the question. I don't know that I have the information necessary to say, you know what, I don't think Eric Washington's a good defensive line coach because he's had a lot of success and there's been good players under him that have developed. Again, it just could be that Epinesa and Basham aren't that good. Adam says, even when Josh Allen has time to throw, he is hesitating. Seems nobody is open. Is it the route concept, the wide receivers not getting separation, or Allen just wanting to go down the field and waiting too long? You know, one thing that came out on Twitter on Monday morning, maybe afternoon, was the chart of the Bengals perfectly covering 67% of the Bills' passing attempts. Like, just had the perfect coverage. Lou Anarumo took Ken Dorsey to school. Took him to school. And Allen is hesitating because he didn't have anywhere to go with the ball. And so I think that's more of a design and architecture issue than it is Allen hesitating because he's hesitating. It's not because he's hesitant. It's just that the looks that he's expecting to get were never there with any level of consistency. And I think part of that, a lot of that, almost all of that is on Dorsey. But I've shared this criticism. I don't know that the Bills from a route running perspective are that dynamic. And I think having Cole Beasley out there helps. I think having Khalil Shakir out there helps. But Gabe Davis as your primary target opposite of Diggs as a limited route runner really hurts you in that capacity, in my opinion. The next one today comes from Peter. Peter says, it seems this Bills team ran out of steam from a difficult season. I remember watching the Four Falls of Buffalo. By the 4th Super Bowl, they had nothing to give. I very much felt this was the Bills today, just emotionless. Do you think that factored in? I give Peter credit for sending this in. He sent this on Sunday night at about 8:45 p.m. And then on Monday, we started to hear from players, whether it was Milano, Dawson Knox, Von Miller spoke, Micah Hyde spoke, Josh Allen spoke. And at least 3 of them said we ran out of gas. We just ran out of gas. Talked about just being very tired, fatigued. Talked about the coaching doing their best to manage the workload, but guys were gassed. And we talked about the early season bye. I think that contributed, but you go down the stretch, and I think down the stretches where really a lot of that adversity hit with losing a home game, the travel situation with Chicago, the whole Damar Hamlin situation where that's taxing on people, right? That's emotionally taxing. I think there's a lot of truth to that. I don't know how I feel about it, because I'm sensitive. I try to be sensitive to all of those dynamics, but at the end of the day, I mean, you got to find a way, right? You got to dig deep and find something. You run out of gas. I mean, that's a hard pill for me to swallow. That's a really hard pill for me to swallow if that's true. And I assume it is. You heard multiple players say that it's true. They ran out of gas. That's something they'll have to look at. And I think Coach McDermott does a really good job with load management and sports sciences. Like, I think all of that is a strength of the organization, but I think some of those outside factors were just a lot to overcome. A lot to overcome. David says, you mentioned on Monday's show that a playoff loss will expose areas of weakness in a team. Recalling the problems he had with his previous team, do you have any concern about the obvious frustration shown by Stefon Diggs after the loss? So obviously we saw Diggs he went up to Josh Allen during the game with kind of both palms to the air, very emotional there. And then the reports that he very quickly got his things, left the locker room. Duke Johnson goes and gets him, brings him back in, and he was there for when McDermott addressed the team, and then he very quickly left again. Diggs is frustrated, and he should be. The offense just scored 10 points. 10 points at home. Got outscored by 3 scores, and he had 4 catches. I'm sure Stefon Diggs feels like he could have made a bigger impact in the game. Now, I haven't watched the All-22. I haven't seen everything that the Bengals did to fully take him away at times. And I mean, he was targeted 10 times in the game. There were some missed situations, whether it was Josh missing a throw, reading leverage, right? I definitely felt that live. I saw there's some miscommunications from those two. But I would understand his frustration. If he wasn't pissed off, I would not like that. You're out here putting everything you have. We know Stefon Diggs is an unbelievable worker. Dude's putting everything he has into this. Now, the last 3 years that he's been in Buffalo, top production, top offense, stall out in the playoffs. That gets frustrating. That gets old. But I don't think you have to panic over a bigger issue here. Stefon Diggs has affirmed his love for Buffalo, playing for the Bills, the organization. He is said as much as Josh Allen's the quarterback he was born to play with. All of that stuff can be true while you're simultaneously very frustrated at the situation right now. And Steph Diggs didn't force his way out of Minnesota because of the team and the results of the team. He wasn't used correctly. He wasn't a featured component of the offense. Stefon Diggs is 1,000,000% a featured component of the Bills' offense, of one of the highest volume targeted guys in the league year over year. The production's there. So I would, as you look to Minnesota and say, well, oh no, well, it wasn't because the team didn't win or lose. It was because of his role with the team. His role with the team. How could you possibly? You got the quarterback you said you were born to play with, and you're one of the most targeted players in the league year over year. I think there's a big difference in those two things. Now, look, if you want to extend criticism because Steph Diggs is a leader of the team with a C on his jersey, should have been there after the game to sit there and answer questions from media, okay. I don't know. Everybody handles things differently. That's one thing I've learned. I'm not an old guy, right? I'm in my mid-30s. I don't know everything. I'm fully aware of that. But one thing that I have learned as I've aged is that people process things and handle things differently, right? And expecting everyone to do things a certain way, that's unreasonable on your behalf to think that every player is going to handle everything the same way, or every person is going to handle every situation the same way, the way you think it should happen. And so obviously he's frustrated. He wanted to get out of the situation. And it is what it is. But I don't think there's a bigger concern here. This is a fiery competitor that wants to be productive and wants to win football games. It all comes from a very good place. Last one today comes from Chris. Chris says, can you give us your take on the Bills Super Bowl window? I saw a lot of Twitter comments that it is now closed. I am concerned we missed our shot. What is your take on this? I love the podcast. Keep up the great work. Thank you, Chris. So the question is, what is my take on the Bills Super Bowl window, and is it closed? Well, Josh Allen's in his prime. He's about to enter his age 27 season. I sure as hell hope the Super Bowl window is not closed. And I know a lot of that is tied to, right? Super Bowl window is tied to your roster, your cap situation, who's coming, who's leaving. And I got to be honest, I have focused this season on this season. Obviously, I wrote a book during the season, podcasting during the season. My focus has really been on this year. And my normal look aheads that I would kind of do at the salary cap, I haven't done that as much as I usually have. I know that the Bills have the ability to create cap space. I know that they have things they need to do. They got to get better in the trenches. They got to get another meaningful weapon for Josh Allen. And they have to evaluate some of their schemes. That has to happen. Those are the biggest things that have to happen this offseason. But a 27-year-old Josh Allen better not be close to this Super Bowl window expiring. And I know this is rooted in a fear that the Bengals have passed the Bills. And yeah, they have. They absolutely have. We've got 69 minutes of football that tells us that the Bengals are a better football team than the Bills. But that doesn't mean you can't get right back in it. I don't think the Chiefs have passed the Bills. I think the Chiefs have some good things about their roster, but defensively, a lot of questions. I don't love their receivers. I mean, obviously, Pat Mahomes is going to throw for 5,000 yards a year no matter who's catching the football. But I think they have questions on that team. I'm not fully convinced that the Chiefs have passed the Bills. I think if the Bills beat the Bengals, I thought they were going to handle the Chiefs. So maybe the conversation has shifted. Maybe you feel like the Dolphins have closed the gap a little bit. Jacksonville looks like an up-and-coming team. The Chargers look like they're pretty good. And we kind of live with this fixation on the Bills, but I am nowhere near ready to talk about the Bills' window being closed with Josh Allen in his prime. Work to be done, for sure, but it ain't closed. All right, folks, that's going to do it for us here today on the podcast. As for the rest of this week, I'm obviously very interested in when Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane have their year-end press conferences. And so whenever that is, that will become a major focus of what we do on the podcast. Might do another day of herd mentality. We will start doing our roster evaluation. We're going to do a lot here. We're going to really set the foundation for what the Bills need to do with their own players, who they need to bring in, who they need to draft, how they maximize their assets. We're going to look at everything here this offseason. So don't miss anything. Make sure that you're subscribed. Would love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills. And I look forward to catching up with you again tomorrow.